Hello and welcome back. In this video, I will be talking about some personalities, Musk and Besant's fight, Pam Bondi, Bukele, and a little on Alex Jones. I will also talk about the book of Daniel, the statute that he interpreted for the king, about omniwar, and also about Jane Eyre, where you will find oral history and today's social engineering that has taken place. Elon Musk and Scott Bessent apparently got into a shouting match last week. It was within earshot of the president and others in the West Wing. Scott Bessent is Treasury Secretary, and of course, Elon Musk was heading Doge, and I guess he's officially out next month in May, but he's probably kind of backing out at this point now. The argument was about the IRS. I read in one place that Bessent accused Musk of overpromising and under-delivering, and Musk called Bessent a Soros agent. The next day, Gary Shapley, Musk's choice, was replaced as acting IRS commissioner by Deputy Treasury Secretary Michael Folkender, Bessent's choice. Sources told NBC News that Bessent went to Trump and complained that Shapley had been installed Tuesday without his knowledge. Now, you can say a lot politically of what went on here between Bessent, Musk, who is exiting, and of course, President Trump placing somebody in without asking or letting Bessent know. And, the lines get very blurred here. I'm going to look at this from a different point of view. There wasn't a fist fight. It didn't seem to me that there was really any outrageous language or behavior or anything like that. The complaint is about two men feeling very passionate about what they do to the point where they're going to fight over it. This speaks volumes about the social engineering that has gone on in this country. How did we get to this point that having an argument over a power kind of decision is wrong? Because it hasn't always been that way. Thinking back some years, this passive aggressive term began to pop up, and it was the undermining of right and wrong. That way, you couldn't choose right or wrong, one over the other. And it made the rounds for quite some time. Even if a person was very clearly in the right, the social engineering was taking that away from people. And for quite some time, you would hear this term, passive aggressive. You're passive aggressive. It never made any sense to me because if you're going to take a stand, you're going to be aggressive. Passive aggressive, it was a way of canceling out what was right. Move forward a little bit, and the children in the schools were being handled differently. I found this out the hard way. Now, my daughter was European descent, and a lot of Mexicans had moved into our area. I was in a position where I couldn't up and move or really do much of anything at the time. So my daughter went to school as a minority. We didn't have that family within us. No, my daughter was growing up with a mother who believed in the individual because of the European descent background. So when I look back, I realized that my daughter was at a real disadvantage going to school, which formed all their little gangs, and you didn't see the independence at all. My daughter was because she was white, but the Mexican kids all had their brothers and sisters and this and that. They did not make a move anywhere without having somebody along with them. She got a hard time in school. And of course, it was always a couple of girls ganging up on her, the single. And when my daughter would finally have enough and stepped over that line, she would be the one in trouble. The schools wouldn't address the taunting. These two behaviors that I've just mentioned permeated throughout our society. And these two maneuvers were part of a much larger way of socially engineering this country. This was how right and wrong was cut away at. And so what you get was no right, no wrong, just a very neutral response. And look at this picture. And of course, in the middle of the social engineering, you get in the schools, put your desk together. Children 35 years ago were working in groups or began to work in groups. They did not work as the individual. When I went to school, we sat in our individual desks and we competed against everyone in the classroom. Even the way grading was done, you might have a curve. They had a couple of different ways of grading, but we were very comfortable with competing against one another. And that would be removed when you get this put your desk together, because actually you're graded as a group. It also takes away competition, it takes away other qualities too. I would say that it also takes away the natural leadership ability that some have. This right here is why there's such a big gap between your, J.D. Vance's age and Trump's age, because for at least a generation there, no one is comfortable stepping up and taking over. And these younger people are being forced into these roles so that there can be a continuity of leaders. That's where we are. So when you get your 50-ish year old on down listening to what used to be common behavior, I've heard plenty of men shout and yell in my earlier days. People are very uncomfortable with it. You put your desk together and you come to a consensus. Nothing is really important enough to fight over. They don't have the logic to figure this out. Now, I think what went on between Musk and Besant, they're not really in the same age group. There's about a generation difference between them. Besant was born in 63, Musk in 71. And that's quite a gap. It doesn't take long for generations to change. I know I was born in 52, and by the time I got into music, I really liked the Beatles. If I'd been born a year or two earlier, I probably would have been an Elvis Presley fan. That's how close some of these generational lines are. And I think Musk and Besant fall into that. But also, Musk isn't somebody who's used to taking orders from anyone and really hasn't had to deal with that. And I would say he's probably too old to change now. He does what he wants to do when he wants to do it. Now, when he went in as Doge, finding out where all the spending was, not really being American. He's South African or something. He's a globalist. And what you have going on here is you have Besant, who's American, and you have Musk, who's a global type. So he's very objective when he went in to find out what all this spending was about, which I think was a good thing because we did get a lot of information from him. But you have two ways of operating also that are at odds with each other. You have a nationalistic view, a country's point of view, and you have the globalist point of view. This fight, this world takeover, is going on at every level. I would also say that Besant is just old enough, he's in his earlier 60s, where he wants control of his own turf, his own area, and didn't appreciate Trump just appointing somebody and sliding him in there. He knows better. He knows to listen to authority, but also the rules have changed a lot. This is the current leader of El Salvador, Bukele. There is El Salvador. He is 43 years old, and he was just in the White House visiting with President Trump. What I noticed about him was he had an impeccable appearance. Clean, neat, crisp. All I had heard about him beforehand was that he got all the criminals, the gangbangers, under control within his country. And I remember thinking at the time, that's quite a feat, and one would have to be quite brave in order to do so. My overall impression of him sitting there in the White House with President Trump was that he had somewhat of a different look to him. Doing a quick search, I found that his first name is Nayib, Nayyib. Not really a Spanish kind of a name. And so I checked who his parents were, and what I found was his father is of Palestinian origin. He apparently was a Muslim religious leader and, of course, a businessman. His name was Armando Bukele Katan, Kattan, with an accent over the A. What I was actually thinking before I searched out his name and who his father was, I looked at him and I thought, I'll bet this is the Iranian bloodline. Those of you who follow me know what I'm talking about, and I will put the link to that video below. You know, in our country, and probably just about everywhere, this mixing and moving of people makes everything quite uncertain. People are not always who you think they are. So, Alex Jones, InfoWars, it seems that they may really be coming to an end later next week. And that would be the end of April, early May, in case I'm not quite sure when this video will be posted. He seems at peace with it. He's gone through a lot for the last couple of years. He has been done wrong and he's handling it very well. What I wanted to make a comment on was apparently the local judge there who's been handling this has just gotten tired that the two sides won't settle, whatever that may mean, considering how much Alex Jones has really lost. He has lost a lot, and it's put a heavy toll onto him. But as I said, I watched last week, and I do believe he is truly at peace with this. Anyway, back to the judge. The judge, I think, just gave up. He wants to wash his hands of it, and that's really what's going on here. And the wheels in my mind started turning. Do you remember, and if I have this wrong, because I'm doing this from off the top of my head, remember, didn't Rush Limbaugh move from New York to Florida because it had something to do with how much tax was being paid and how few people were really paying into New York State? I would think that a judge would take that into consideration and treat a homeboy the way they should be treated. I'm sure that Alex Jones does pay a fair share of tax to the state of Texas. Now, I know it's a very big state. You have lots of business going on there. But considering the personality he is, I don't think the judge is really doing the right thing by him. Now, if my memory isn't serving me correctly, please leave a comment below. I took a quick peek at Pam Bondi's birth chart. There is no birth time, so I can just give you a couple of generalities. First off, I noticed that she has a Scorpio sun, and it is conjunct Neptune, also in Scorpio. This is why she gravitates towards film, the shows. It's idealism. Also, considering this is the sign of Scorpio, the sun, and Neptune, she is very closed mouth. This is someone who's able to keep a secret. Also, often when you have Neptune like that sitting on a main planet, it can denote confusion. So there might be confusion in her life. If people have their doubts about her, they might be thinking along the right track. Her Mercury, which is the planet of communication and thinking, is in the sign of Sagittarius, and it has some harsh aspects to other natal planets. Chances are she might talk a little bit bigger than what she is able to deliver. And this is probably a balancing act she deals with in her life. In other words, she gets in her own way. She also has Venus conjunct Saturn. Many people, when I do famous people's charts, people that are out before the public, this aspect often pops up. It's social climbing, it's gravitating towards successful people, it's gravitating towards those who can help you, who can do something for you. Saturn, in regards to Venus, is good in that people can acquire and achieve. Saturn is also the restrictor. And it's possible that when people get to the end of their lives, if they have any kind of depth whatsoever and look back, they may notice that in regards to their love life, that love eluded them. In the book of Daniel, he interprets a dream or a vision about world governments, and they are weighed in on by metals, the value of metals. Here is one interpretation of that statute. I was curious about Medo-Persia. What countries are those? So I did a quick search. And of course, borders have changed throughout the centuries. But what I came up with was it represents Persia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Turkey, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Egypt. So that helps with the general consensus of about where it is. Here's another drawing with a little bit more detail on it about the different countries involved and into the future. Now, I'm not an expert on people's different religions and what they think this vision was all about, but I'm going to assume because of those beasts in this image here, it has something to do with the seventh-headed wild beast that emerges there in Revelation. These are all terms that kind of run together. And that's why it's good to read the Bible and kind of get these different terms straight in your head, because at least you know they're connected. Also in the book of Daniel is the term the king of the north and the king of the south. I did a quick check, and at that time in the book of Daniel, most likely what it was referring to were these old kingdoms or empires of Greek or Greece and Egypt. So what you have in this book of Daniel, and there's more in it besides this talk of governments, is a summing up of the world empires at that time. You get the minor players involved with the term of the king of the north, the king of the south. And not being an expert here, I've always had the feeling that these beast images had something to do with the seventh-headed or 10-headed wild beast in the book of Revelation. Now, back to this king of the north, king of the south. The way I always put it together in my mind was this pushing that goes on. You have your major players, and then you have the minor players where there's always pushing going on. And I would liken it to what we see right now in our time. You have the biggies like Russia, China, the US. And they have their little satellite countries that are connected to them. But you have this pushing right now going on in the world with Ukraine, and also Israel is in there mucking it all up too. And they have their own thing going on with the Palestinians. Now, I'm no expert on any of this by any means, but my take on the Bible I can remember early on thinking, why doesn't the Bible talk about other peoples and countries that existed And the truth is, the Bible only deals with a certain area in the world. China existed back then, but I don't think there might be a mention of it indirectly with a word. Maybe China was referred to with another term. I really don't know. Or there were other countries and peoples too, but the Bible deals with the Bible lands. So I would keep that in mind when you're thinking of this time of the end that we are hearing about. So, what does it really mean when you catch this phrase, the end of the system of things? Well, what I always understood it to be was the commercial part of our system, the governmental part of our system, and the religious part of our system. That's right. Religion supposedly will all be dissolved too, right along with the governments and the commercial part of our system. I know this is a bit of a ramble, but just go back and read those images that I placed there, the different interpretations of them. You have the governmental systems, the large governments that Daniel saw in his vision. You also get the mention of the king of the north, the king of the south, and what our entire system really is right now. And supposedly, this is what is to be dissolved. Now, some of you know I was with an end times religion, excuse me, for a short while. And one of the signals that we would be very close and in the time of the end would be the term peace and security. Whenever it is they are saying peace and security, instant destruction would be upon them. That term shows up in 1 Thessalonians. It was about 35 years ago, around 1990-ish, 91, around in there. I was hearing peace and security a little bit here and there. It was coming out of our State Department, at the U.S. State Department at that time. One of the things I noticed with the Bible is time. Now, when you think about peace and security and instant destruction happening, does this mean God's time or our time? Because they are two very different things. What is instant destruction to God may be that 35 years to man. So I don't know if that was exactly the call I was looking for. I always kind of had this impression that peace and security would most likely come out of the UN. So who knows? Maybe it just hasn't happened yet. But it seems to me that peace and security would probably be on a worldwide scale. So, anyway, it's just some food for thought and some terms to think about. Also, I think the Bible lands are still very, very important. So, I hope I got that across that these different metals equate to the quality of government throughout Bible history. So, here in this statute, at the bottom, the ankles and the feet are made of iron and clay. It doesn't denote any kind of a strong government or governments at all. Clay and iron do not stick. My own interpretation is clay most likely represents people. So possibly the people and the governments there, denoting with iron, are not sticking together whatsoever. A point that I forgot is these governments may very well be represented in Revelation by that 7 or 10-headed wild beast that the harlot rides on. My understanding that I learned was the harlot is the world empire of religion. Religion is always involved with government. Also, one of the last major empires mentioned was that of Rome, And also my understanding was that Great Britain emerges out of this Roman Empire with its statutes and laws. America is one of the tiny bumps on that wild beast, and it's always in the Bible has been connected to Rome via Great Britain or England. I've always heard it referred to as the Anglo-American power, according to the Bible. So, to be dissolved away are the three branches of Satan's system on this earth, which is your commercial system, the governmental system, and the religious system. Sometimes in the Bible, the C, S-E-A, will be referenced too. And also my understanding was C represented the people, the restless sea of humanity. You know how the oceans will toss and turn? That was my understanding of how it was represented. The people were, the people were represented in the Bible. The governments, although we may not be seeing it, they are very concerned about this restless sea of humanity. I want to say up front, I don't have a problem with religion. There are many people that are very happy in their churches and their belief system. What I'm talking about here, since we don't live in that time yet, is Bible prophecy. When these religions are done away with, this picture here is probably a more natural form of worshiping God. It's from the individual to God through the power of prayer. This is our personal power. I've talked about this in a previous video, which is there's a new system rising up now. People are becoming very aware about their food, their health, their treatment of animals, how others should be treated. Jesus was about love. Other religions, too, have stipulations about showing kindness and giving to others. How often do we see this practiced? Or let's say, how often do people have all that much to give, really? I suspect, and my gut has been saying this for a while, that system of the commercial, the religious, and the governmental is being dissolved away with now. There's another scripture in the Bible, and it's in the early part of the Bible, but it talks about the separating work, the wheat and the shaft. It also says, and you will look, and the evil one will be gone. So all of this could happen very intuitively, and one, over a period of time, realizes the badness is gone in this world. Anyway, this is all a bit of a ramble and confusing, but I hope for those who are really not clear on this got the main points. This vision, this dream that Daniel interpreted had to do with the different world governmental empires that have existed down to our very day. 2, you have the king of the north and the king of the south mentioned, and this is a pushing that goes on between powers. These governmental systems are most likely that 7 or 10-headed wild beast that appears in Revelation with the harlot sitting on top of it. Catherine Austin Fitts hosted a symposium entitled Omniwar, a symposium presented by the Study Group on Technology and Power. Although this technocracy is finally coming out, it's been very much occult for a long time. In other words, hidden from plain sight. Even the occult, as most of us know it, Satanism, tarot card reading, all the different arts there have always been considered part of the occult. It's anything that has been hidden. And I would dare say that this technocracy, this symposium, opens up in early 1930s. So it's been around for a long time, although most people have never heard of it until very recently. And because it is occultic and it is about reading people, controlling them, as other occult arts can possibly be, I think it really is worth your time to listen to some of it. Now, the book, Jane Eyre, and you've all seen the old movie floating around, and every once in a while, PBS will make their version, another version of Jane Eyre. But it was published in 1847, and by today's standards, it's quite an old book. It was first published in London before it found its way to America. And I'm sure if one had the time to watch the different movie versions, this love story would take a bit of a twist and a turn. It's a love story. A governess with a harsh background goes to work at a large, very large mansion, and the owner of the mansion and this governess fall in love. The 2006 PBS version was the last version I've seen on it, and it was done in 4 parts. Just for the heck of it, I decided to listen to the audiobook. It was 22 hours long, it was well read, and I got through it probably in about 6 days. I would catch a couple of hours here, a couple of hours there. But what struck me about the book was the incredible English used in it. Over the course of my lifetime, and more recently, I've heard people say, oh, English is good for cussing, or English is good for statistics and business. Well, what does that do to your thinking about your own language? It makes you think that maybe English isn't such a great language. But what I would say is if you don't think that we haven't been dumbed down, listen to 15 minutes of Jane Eyre in this audiobook, and I will put the link below because I caught the one on YouTube. It is an incredible language, and it fits for people who are detailed in their thinking when it comes to human behavior, getting subtle messages across, description. In fact, I'm not giving it really what it deserves when it comes to the description of what the English language can do. But this audiobook made me realize just how stupid as a people we have become. I've even heard it said very recently that chances are the average English speaker only has about 100 words in their vocabulary. And when you listen to a writing such as Jane Eyre, and I'm sure there are other books around that are older and out or even out of the same time period, you will realize how much has been lost in recent years. What struck me in the earlier part of the book, and like I said, it's an English book, is how your station in life is thought of and where all the rules are and the limits. In other words, civil law. And I know it's the wrong word, but this is something that even in my earlier years, there was very much civility built into our way of life. Now, from an American's point of view, the way I see Jane Eyre, who is a governess, a teacher, she was orphaned. She had breeding, but she didn't have parenting, and she was bright. I see Jane Eyre as straddling that bridge between your low class and your upper class. She was upper class, but because of circumstances in life, she's kind of caught in the middle of these two stations in life. This 175-year-old book goes to show how people thought even then. People haven't changed much. Feelings haven't changed much. But even the owner of Thornfield Hall, the one who falls in love with this governess and she with him, had to look at her very differently from what his station in life had taught him, inheritance, land, and all that. Neither one of them had ideal lives and had dealt with much hardship in their lives. The movie doesn't even get across how much territory a book like this written covers. It was fascinating, and I'm really glad I listened to it. If our words and our language has become so small and so shallow, then so have we as people. In fact, maybe our emotions have far more depth than our words do. I'm sure that's debatable, but it really opens a whole, arena of discussion. We have lost a lot, and this dumbing down has been going on for a very long time. This taking away civility has been going on for some time, and I'll just make mention of what I noticed during my lifetime. I graduated high school in 1970, but it was in the late 60s, and this would have been not all that long after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, that the titles were dropped. When I was young, and you'll see it in old television, you referred to your friends' parents as Mr. or Mrs. Teachers were Mr. or Mrs. And all these titles were dropped. You see, those titles make for civil law, civility among people, and it creates respect. It creates this distance between people. I hate to use the word higher or lower, but that's what you need built into society to make it function good and to create an understanding between people of the social norms that are right and wrong. Another thing that disappeared, and probably along with these titles, were the respect for older people. That too is long gone. And I can already hear somebody saying, but there are old a-hoes online. Yep, there always have been. But decorum says that in front of people, in front of public, on a one-to-one with each other, that we still grant an older person that respect. Why? Because it puts civility, it puts order where you need it. You cannot turn everything into a law where you prosecute. And this is where civility steps in. And there's order among people in day-to-day life. So much of that has been done away with. It was also in the late 60s when the dress code for school was done away with. Now, we had our play clothes, our play shoes, and we had our clothes and shoes that we wore to school. And there was a distinct difference between the two. We wore skirts and dresses to school, but I think it was 1969 maybe when the dress code was changed. And of course, I was born and raised and lived in the Bay Area for some years, and I'm sure we got it first, when you could wear a nice pair of pants to school, but you were not allowed to wear your jeans or just anything. But we know over the course of about 20 years, it did deteriorate into that, where kids were wearing just about anything to school. And keep in mind, you had this influx of illegals. We did in the Bay Area there. So a lot of different things were going on in the schools, to the point where eventually you get your gang colors being worn to school. That's why in the later years, 1990s maybe, the schools started enforcing uniforms maybe, or not wearing gang colors. I know the Catholic schools were having a problem with these gangbanger types wearing the large crucifixes. It signaled that they were gangbangers, right? So all kinds of problems came out of this, and the schools were addressing it years later. But you see, you're back to this public decorum, this civility that goes on among people. And the way we dress is a huge part of it. I left California because of the zoo it had become in 2004. Now, I went and got myself some training, and when I was looking for work, one of the things I would hear the person who was hiring saying was they were telling people what they could and couldn't wear on the job. That's how much how we dressed had deteriorated. I even had one person I was interviewing with point out somebody across the room, and these were educated people, okay? But because she just worked there in that one spot, she was wearing sweats to work as well as like a sweatshirt. She was wearing something you'd lounge around in at home. And he wasn't the only one. I heard this come up during interviewing, even among maybe late 40s, early 50s, is not to be wearing jeans with the cuts in them. So dress was becoming a real issue, but it also speaks volumes about civility, about society. It had devolved into people looking and acting poor when they're out in public with one another. I know that sounds like an age complaint, but when you live long enough, you do watch things deteriorate and you see the effect it has on society. So, the point I'm trying to make is when you read a book like Jane Eyre with excellent English and it has civility and it has station in life in it, and you look at your own time period, you realize how much has been lost in that people have respect for one another. It's not just that our societies have been invaded, but everybody on all levels really is not all that respectful towards their fellow man. This civility is almost gone. In fact, when I talk about it, the picture I keep getting in my head is the stoplights at an intersection. You know, it's a good thing people still respect that, but even that has eroded somewhat. But I hope you're getting the gist of what I'm talking about here. I'm not talking about law that you go before a judge and you're sentenced. I'm talking about that law that used to be built into people on a day-to-day basis when dealing with one another. It doesn't mean that two men aren't going to have a fight on the job. I'm not talking about that, but just your day in and day out respect for another human being. In fact, I'm going to close with this. When I listened to the audiobook of Jane Eyre, I would describe it this way. I understood it clearly, but I cannot speak that dialect. Please leave a comment or a thumbs up on the video, and thank you for joining me.